when we get to Los Angeles in 1934, and I highly recommend people check this out. It's very fascinating. There's an article written about there was a geophysical mining engineer doing some work at Fort Moore Hill, and he sunk a shaft and fell down into what is called a catacomb city. And it was an ancient city. They found a treasure map. They found relics and artifacts showing serpent people, what they called reptilians. And what really blew my mind was the LA Times did a full write-up on this, multiple page write-up. They showed the map of the catacomb cities supposedly leading to some treasure, an ancient treasure, and it said there were reptilian inhabitants of this city. And it connected back to some of the beliefs of the indigenous Native Americans. And immediately, this sparked gold fever, if you will. People from all over came to LA to embark on inner Earth treasure hunts back in the 30s. It's mind-blowing. If you didn't see it, you would have a very hard time believing the reality of these claims. But it's interesting also that Los Angeles stands for City of the Angels. It's got a history of being built over catacomb cities of reptilian inhabitants. And this was mainstream news in the 30s. We don't see this stuff in newspapers anymore. You don't hear this type of thing in the news. But in the 30s, this was published by a very reputable, very mainstream news source. Fascinating stuff. But that connects back to the Naga people, the serpent people of the Hindu culture. In my research, I did talk about Mount Shasta, where there's entrances to the mountain. At the time, he was not my friend, who he later became my friend, but a guy named Kenny had reached out to me, who lives at the base of Mount Shasta, essentially. And he reached out to me to tell me that not only does he hike up there, but he's got connections with people that live on the mountain. And he said to this very day, there are excessive amounts of mountain magic that take place on Mount Shasta. It is a sacred magic land. People, they've got family members who have passed these traditions down over the years. And what's even more fascinating is that I also had someone send me a picture. I think they originally thought it was Japanese in origin, but I don't know. But it was a rock carving of a reptilian head. It almost looked like a dinosaur hybrid with a human. And this was on Mount Shasta. Someone living up on Mount Shasta, this was on their property. So there's some pretty interesting things about Mount Shasta. I think also with Mount Shasta, there's some connections to what people call the little people. Uh, there's a lot of speculation about Mount Shasta. I can't really say. I've never been inside. But what's interesting is that there's a lot of belief that some of these subterranean realms are also carved out inside of mountains, that you would go into a mountain. It's almost a hollowed out mountain, and it goes down to a massive underworld city where there's inhabitants. There's people living there, operating there. And I believe it was the Urals in Russia. There's a certain mountain range there that allegedly is so hollowed out and large, that this underworld city is so large and the mountains are hollowed out, that airplanes fly inside. I can't really imagine that. We do show some different artistic renditions in the film of underground cities, massive underground cities, with what we would call skies. You know, like essentially space where planes or flying craft could fly around. And that's another thing that you really find kind of across the line. A lot of the stories where people end up in these subterranean caverns, where they encounter these creatures, these entities. There's always technology beyond what we have on the surface. A lot of times there's some sort of a flying disc or flying saucer being utilized, transporting around inside of these subterranean realms. Matter of fact, the idea of UFOs coming up out of water, goodness, there's countless stories in California, especially out around Malibu, UFOs coming up out of the water. And you say, well, where are they going? You know, when they come back down and they land in the water, where they go? You know, where do they go? Well, there's going back to the Naga, the reptilian serpent people in India. The entrances to their underworld cities are a lot of times near water or underwater. Like you would have to get down into the water. You've got these native stories of like the coming of age stories in order to become a warrior in the tribe, where they'll send the boy. He's not a man yet. They'll send the boy. He'll have to dive into the water, make his way into a cavernous system underneath the water to where there's oxygen, and then from there find another body of water inside the earth, and then go down there and retrieve some type of a relic, a religious relic, pertinent to their tribe, pertinent to their people or their ancestry. And then he's got to get that relic and bring it back up through these different layers of catacomb, what we would call like a catacomb city, or a cavern beneath water with another cavern beneath more water. I mean, it's wild stuff, but they come back with these relics, and now they're a warrior, they're a man. They can enter into that caste system of the tribe. So it's really not outside of that realm to have a UFO coming up out of the water, and then going back down into the water, and then people go diving looking for it, and there's nothing to find. There's no trace of it beneath the water. I believe that many of the deep underground military bases could likely go back to the antediluvian world. They're already there. They're already created. And I mean, just think about it. The Vatican goes around everywhere. The Catholic Church is well known for taking over sacred sites. They just show up, take it by force, political persuasion, like Mount Graham, places in South America, near the Chincana. You've got all these stories of the Catholic Church doing that. Well, think about the American government. They, not to shame anyone here, but the American government is well known for taking things, sacred land, taking things from the Native Americans, the indigenous people. And so these ancient cities underground, these tunnel systems, catacombs, whole cities, hollowed out areas, being antediluvian, the government could have easily taken over these things that were already created, maybe created some extra structural, divisions, walls, basically building inside of structures that were already existing before the flood. Because the structures themselves are so well built, and there is architecture used that is very much connected with megalithic structures around the world. And our governments did not have that technology until the advent of the Industrial Revolution. And so it would make sense that they went down there, took what was already there, utilized these underground sanctuaries, underground cities, what have you, and built inside of them with our modern technology, setting up what we would call deep underground military bases. And so that's already down in a region that they might have already been inhabiting. But, really, some of these DUMBs, these deep underground military bases, not only could go back to before the flood, but some of the technology might still be there operating by some of these other entities, what we would call off-world entities, if there's truth to what Phil Schneider said. Absolutely. When we go back to some of the indigenous cultures, I don't think it's a disservice to use the term mythologies or myths or legends, because a lot of these things, we can't validate all of the aspects of them, but they have been orally passed down. They're oral traditions. Now, some of the written traditions are completely contradictory to the oral traditions, which is fascinating. We'll get into that too, especially with the Anasazi, because the written tradition is absolutely reversed from the oral tradition, which means they wrote it down in order to give the mainstream story, while the inner workings of the tribal people kept the real story, because it's almost too fascinating for the mainstream man to understand or to accept. But the indigenous people, most of them have some sort of a creation story, a creation myth. And I call it a myth because it's not completely in line with Scripture. We know that the Bible, the creation story in Genesis, that's the real story. All the other ones we would call legends and myths because they're kind of offshoots, kind of blurry versions of that. But the story of you've got Navajo, you've got these different legends where the great ones were supernatural beings that would come up from inside the earth, create humanity, endow humanity with abilities, education, teach them how to do things, and then they would go back down into the earth where they would reside, but occasionally coming back up to the surface to overlook the operations of mankind, essentially. And doing that, there would be some sort of, you know, overlording, if you will. They would come up, teach them, hold them accountable. That's what some of the natives would teach. That's where, they claim that their origin point was inside the earth. Actually, there's multiple tribes that claim that their tribal origin point is inside the earth. Kind of a fascinating little bit of knowledge there. The Apache story, the Apache creation myth, is very fascinating, and it's different from some of the other tribes because they say that an ancient bearded man came down from heaven in a silver flying disc, and he began to create everything which is good, everything that is good and useful and lovely. And then shortly thereafter, a portal opened where a reptilian god man, some sort of a reptilian in the form of a human, but not a human, comes through the portal and begins to teach mankind sorcery, alchemy, witchcraft, magic, how to open up portals, which is just very interesting that they would have this story of a good creator coming down and creating that which is good, and then this reptilian coming through another portal, corrupting what the good creator made. Another fascinating part of this is that the Apache couldn't grow facial hair. As with many of the indigenous people, they don't have beards and facial hair, yet their creation myth talks about an ancient, God coming down with a beard. Not to go too far into that, I don't want to speculate too much there. It's just kind of an interesting little story. But when you get to the Anasazi, and I wanted to kind of mention the Apache creation myth first, because it's going to kind of go parallel with some of the things with the Anasazi. The Anasazi, they've got a very fascinating story that the mainstream says that there was something like a 20-year drought that had happened. And so they had to migrate. It was a slow migration, and they died in the migration. They say that's why there's all these bones of the Anasazi, that appear on this migration route. But when you talk to someone in the know, say a medicine man, historian of a tribe, and they tell you, what really happened according to their tribe, they're going to tell you that the Anasazi basically started to have this experience where a portal opened in the earth. Giants began to come up out of this portal in the earth, like from inside the earth, as they began to eat the Anasazi, ripping them to shreds, like jerky, if you will. About that same time, a portal opened and a reptilian comes through and begins to teach the Anasazi how to go down inside the earth and to build these inner earth temples, like a sanctuary, like a church, like what we would call a church temple or a church sanctuary. This reptilian taught the Anasazi to go down into the earth and to build what they called kivas. And these were prayer rooms. These were rooms where they would do rituals. And the reptilian taught them the same type of magic, apparently, in the rituals that the reptilian also taught the Apache. So we see a parallel there. And so once the Anasazi started to do this, they began to open up portals. That was one of the rituals that was taught by the reptilian, according to their legends. And they would open up portals. All types of strange entities began to emerge on the face of the earth. And the giants began to get more fierce. And the Anasazi were ripped to shreds, just absolutely ripped to shreds. When you study the archaeological digs where they're pulling up the bones of the Anasazi, they're mauled. They're not just like whole bone structures. They're shredded bone pieces, almost like shrapnel. Like Tom Horn said in Hollow Earth Chronicles, it was like they were being ripped to shreds, eaten by the giants. But when they opened up those portals, according to the legends, other entities came forth. Maybe they were fallen angels, which kind of gets back into the idea of the Greeks talking about Tartarus being filled with monsters. Because we don't really know all the forms that fallen angels took, but the Anasazi disappeared. And it's fascinating because they had these hollowed out areas in the caves, like hollowed out caves in the mountain, and they found bags of salt. They found tools, things that would have been, apparently in that time, salt was like gold. They had all these supplies to live. It would almost be like someone disappears nowadays. You're watching like a true crime show and this lady disappears and they say, "Oh, well, she just left her husband." But then they find her car and she's got milk, eggs, cheese, groceries in the back seat. Obviously, if she was trying to run away, she would not have bought groceries to leave in the back of the car. The Anasazi, just like that, would not have had all of these things in place. They wouldn't have left that behind if they were just going to migrate. So there's a lot of conspiracy involved in the story, the official story that they have repackaged to tell of the Anasazi, one of the most mysterious of the tribes. When you think about the biblical explanation of the giants, they were hybrids. So I believe that the giants definitely would have resided inside the earth. Now, I do think that there's some possibility of in these cavernous regions, and we're going to get into some of this in a minute, even deeper. But the idea of these cavernous cities, these catacomb cities inside the earth, I do believe that there are dimensional realities there, kind of like Tartarus. I don't believe that you or I could go on a journey and physically approach Tartarus. But I do believe the giants had something to do with creating these subterranean cities, because we're finding out now that much of the technology used when you get down to like the Shinkana, and the Shinkana is just one example of countless underground cities throughout the entirety of the earth. And a lot of times when you find these cities, you find that there are megalithic structures on top of where the entrance would be or near an entrance. The Shinkana is basically the underground cavernous tunnel systems, if you will, cities of tunnel systems in South America. You're talking about an entrance very potentially at the foot of the Andes Mountains. And I believe the Shinkana itself, the name means a place where one gets lost. Many people would go down there. You have Incan treasure there. But even with the Inca, the Incan people and the different indigenous people who did utilize these cavernous systems in these cities, they were not responsible for building them. They discovered them. So when you get down there and you look around, you find out that these cities were actually built, these tunnel cities, catacombs, they were built before the flood of Noah's day. And they were utilizing a technology that wasn't even invented in our world until the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So there would have been no technology. The Inca did not, the Inca, they didn't do anything but utilize these tunnel systems. People go down there, they get lost. Many people that go into the Shinkana never come back unless they have specific knowledge on how to get there. And you're talking about, Peru, Chile. I mean, these tunnels, they go possibly even under the ocean to Antarctica. I know that's kind of wild, but various places around the world have these subterranean cities, these catacomb cities, and it's believed that somehow they're connected throughout the entirety of the earth. If you have the right knowledge, if you've got the training, essentially you could get from one part of the earth to the absolute opposite going through tunnel systems in some of these cities. You've got underground cities all over the place with a lot of interesting legends and myths. Even here in America, you've got the Kentucky Mammoth Caves. You've got Chiang Sha. You've got different places in Asia Minor. One of the things that's real fascinating is that when you get to India, not only do they believe in the subterranean realms, and in the Hindu belief, they also have references to what we would call Agartha, Agarti. But in the Hindu tongue, they call it Aryavartha. Now, Aryavartha is very, very interesting because it translates into English as the land of the Aryans. The Aryans. Now, scratch your head on this for a minute. The Aryans, that was the name of the race that was considered the supreme race of beings that lived inside the earth, that was part of the theosophical root race theory. You had Madame Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner. You had some of these others that really focused in on this Aryan race being the supreme race of supreme races. Because in the root race theory, you had these antediluvian races. The Aryan race kind of overtook everything else, became the supreme race. But the Hindus clearly teach that this subterranean realm is called Aryavartha, the land of the Aryans. Now, the Aryans are not human, by the way. Very much a reference likely back to first generation, second generation Nephilim, or even directly to the gods of old, which we would call the fallen angels that kept not their first estate. What was fascinating is that the Hindu belief, while um, also paying nod to Shambhala and some of these other titles for the inner earth, realm, the Indian belief has some different views on some things. And I just want to outline this real briefly. You have this group of serpent people that the Hindus talk about called the Naga. Kind of a scary, horrific thought. They're serpent people. What maybe we would call them reptilians. That's not the language used in the Hindu culture. They're just serpent people, but they have an affinity for water. A lot of times, they have entrances underneath water that lead into their subterranean realms. And the two cities that are most closely linked to this is Bhagvati and Batala. And basically, they're as above, so below. So you've got actual real cities, Patala and Bhagvata, they're on the surface. I'm sorry, Patala and Bhagvati, they're on the surface, but they also believe that there are subterranean cities under the same name that are parallel. The whole as above, so below. You've got the surface level, and then you've got underneath the world that we know, and they believe that's where the reptilians live, what I would call a reptilian, but what they call the serpent people or the Naga. The Naga also show up in some of the different cultures of Buddhists, Thai. It's not just the Hindus. But the Naga people, there's a lot of very rich history. When you go to India, you'll see a lot of rock carvings. You'll see a lot of different displays of what these serpent people might look like, and they're all different. Like, you're not going to see they don't all match up and line up. You're going to see some that look like cobras, like a cobra man with a hood, like the cobra hood on the back of the neck, and then you'll see others that look like almost like a reptilian mammal. It's very, very weird to see all these different reliefs and rock carvings and even idol statues created. The Hindu belief of the Naga, interestingly, seems to have some sort of a parallel with something that we see in America beneath the City of Angels.